You're listening to The Voice of Russia in London. I'm Scott Craig. In this program, I'm taking an in-depth look at something that's had a lot of press attention, but is still relatively little understood. We're used to using the internet in many different aspects of our daily lives, from the weekly food shopping to booking travel, banking, and of course sharing the details of our every waking moment on social media. It seems like every night out in a bar or restaurant with friends is documented, the pictures uploaded and shared with the world, often not exactly catching us at our best. And online dating, something that many people thought had a faint whiff of desperation about it when it took off, has now become just another way for people to meet. But would you trust your money in a totally digital currency, freely exchanged like dollars, rubles, or yen? A new phenomenon has emerged: cryptocurrencies, and chief among them, Bitcoin. But what exactly is a cryptocurrency? What does it do? What is it used for? How safe is it? And is it, as some observers and regulators believe, being used to launder cash and pay for illicit transactions away from the ever-watchful eye of the authorities? Thailand thinks so. Its central bank has just banned Bitcoin, making it illegal to use the currency in the country. So what's all the fuss about, and what does it tell us about changing attitudes to money? Are we moving away from traditional currencies, failing banks, state surveillance, in favor of anonymity and online money? So what exactly is a Bitcoin? Put simply, a Bitcoin is a unit of digital currency that can be traded or used to buy goods and services, either online or in shops. This story starts back in 2009 when a previously unknown programmer calling himself Satoshi Nakamoto published a paper online introducing a new peer-to-peer payment system called Bitcoin. He outlined a complex algorithm that would control how the currency worked. It built on a number of technological innovations, lessons learned from previous failures, and incorporated heavy encryption and a totally decentralized payment system to move bitcoins around the world. But crucially, he structured the new currency to have a maximum supply. Only a maximum of 21 million bitcoins will ever exist, meaning the currency, in theory, should avoid inflation and retain its value, mimicking the way a conventional money supply at its most basic should work. But as quickly as Nakamoto appeared, he vanished into the shadows, and to this day, no one knows who he really is or what became of him. But that didn't stop his new anonymous currency from taking off. Anton Yemelyanov is a Russian entrepreneur and the founder of Litecoin, an online currency platform based on bitcoins. I asked him about the mystery surrounding Nakamoto and how cryptocurrencies came about.
Digital currencies per se have existed now for a number of years, and they existed in different forms, where companies have issued their own tenders, and they have acted like banks in a centralized manner, where currencies have been issued to customers, and a majority of these organizations and attempts have failed due to their centralized nature, that there was somebody behind that. Now, that all has changed in 2009 when an individual or a group known as Satoshi Nakamoto pseudonym, nobody knows who exactly that is because the person has disappeared after about a year of being within the online activity. He has released something known as Bitcoin. Bitcoin was something completely unique and different comparing to any other system that has previously existed.
Digital money is no different than many other forms of money. Cash is freely traded electronically. Payments are made using debit and credit cards. But what's different about bitcoins is the way the system is organized. There's no central bank, for example, that controls the money supply. At the heart of the Bitcoin system is the computer algorithm, which uses the combined computing power of Bitcoin users to generate the data that moves the system along and allows transactions to be made. New coins are also created or mined by users solving complex mathematical problems that lead to the discovery of new coins. And it's this peer-to-peer structure and the complexity of the technology driving it that makes the system anonymous and decentralized. Anton Yemelyanov again.
all over the internet. There is thousands of computers that are involved in this. They're all interconnected with each other. There is no central point of failure. They all talk with each other, and they process transactions. In this case, they're monetary transactions, but the currency would be cryptocurrency, such as Bitcoin, Litecoin, and such. And this can be done instantaneously without any fees. So there are fees, but they're so minuscule that they can be completely ignored. The main problem that Bitcoin solved is something known as a double spend problem. When it comes to digital data, if you take an email, for example, if I send an email to you, and then I turn around and I send the same email to another person, then I have sent the same piece of data to two different people, and they both possess it. Now, what Bitcoin solves is it solves this double spend problem, where when I send a piece of data to one computer, I cannot send it to another.
People freely exchange hard currency for bitcoins at any of a number of online exchanges. The currency floats freely like any currency, meaning it can and has suffered from extreme price volatility. Prices hit a high in April 2013. One bitcoin was worth $266. Earlier in the same year, it was worth just $13. But it was short-lived. Bitcoin then suffered a crash later that month when panic selling occurred, causing the price to fall swiftly to around the $65 mark. The Bitcoin price bubble had dramatically burst. Since then, Bitcoin prices have been steadily regaining their value. One is now worth around $98, and the total value of all Bitcoins currently in circulation stands at $1 billion. So, how do people buy them? And how easy is it to spend them in the real world? So I've come on to one of the many online exchanges where you can buy Bitcoins. I've set up an account, so I just want to log into that now. And from there, it should be a fairly straightforward process to actually buy Bitcoins. I hope to be able to buy the equivalent of about 10 UK pounds. At current exchange rates, that is 0.1919 Bitcoins. And so I've just entered that information in, and now I'm just finding sellers who are available to sell. So I've come up with a list of available sellers, some variance on the amount in pounds that it is, but the cheapest is 10.82. So I'm just clicking to buy those now. So it's come up confirming that the offer is there. There's a seller who confirms that they're ready to sell. So I've just logged into my online banking to make the payment to the seller. So everything looks good. I'm clicking to make the payment. There's also a time limit that you have to make this transaction. There's a countdown going on the screen. I click on payment sent. Payment has been made. And it's just come up on the screen now that the transaction is successful. The Bitcoins have been transferred into my Bitcoin wallet. So it now shows my balance as 0.1919 Bitcoins. And it's now just flashed up on my phone, on my digital wallet, that I have received Bitcoins. And if all is well, I should be able to spend these Bitcoins at retailers prepared to accept them. This is a beautiful sunny day here in London, and I've come to the Penbury Tavern in East London in Hackney for professional reasons, I should point out. It claims to be the first pub in Britain to accept Bitcoins as a method of payment, and I've come just to find out how easy it is to use Bitcoins to pay for everyday things like drinks in your local pub. Hi there.
Hi.
Hi. Could I get a pint of the Sparta, please?
Right, I'll just let that settle a moment. It's $3.20.
Great, thanks. Can I use Bitcoins to pay?
Of course.
So, how exactly do we do this? I've just taken out my mobile phone and I'm going into my digital wallet that's got my Bitcoin balance in it. Where do we go from here?
And then I think you just take a picture of the pattern on the screen.
Okay, so let me...
You send coins.
Send coins. Okay. So I'm just taking a picture of a barcode on the till at the bar, or trying to, if my phone will. Just a bit of. There we go. So it's taken a picture of the barcode, and it's come up with the amount on my phone, the amount to pay 0.0589 bitcoins, which is 3.3426 pounds at current rates of exchange. So I just click send and stand back. Okay, so I'm just looking at the screen now. It flashed up green Bitcoin payment received. So that's it basically. How popular is it? I mean, how many people do you get actually asking you to pay with Bitcoins?
Not many, but more and more. Over the past couple of months, there's been people coming in. There's some people who come in specifically because we have Bitcoin and they want to try it out.
Right, so there's a kind of almost kind of novelty factor, do you think?
I think so. It's an interesting new thing. I know that our owner had a particular interest in installing it. So,
I mean, if you had to put a number on it, in an average day, how many people do you get sort of paying with it?
Maybe about 5 a day.
Okay. Do they say anything about why they want to use it or why they want to pay with Bitcoins? I mean, it's very easy, obviously, but it's not easier necessarily than cash.
I don't know. I think they think it's cool.
But while it may be easy to buy and use bitcoins for everyday things like drinks in the pub, a number of serious questions have been raised by regulators over the potential use of bitcoin in illegal transactions, like money laundering or for buying illegal drugs. Law enforcement agencies around the world have been struggling to get to grips with a freely exchangeable currency that can be moved with the click of a mouse, totally anonymously. A number of online platforms have appeared where bitcoins can be used to pay for illegal goods. Silk Road is an online marketplace which uses technology called Tor to hide the identities of buyers and sellers. It's virtually untraceable, and it's estimated to have hundreds of sellers with millions in turnover. Many of the items on sale are illegal drugs, and Bitcoin is the payment method of choice for many of its customers. And concerns have also been raised about using the coins to launder money, exchanging hard cash for bitcoins, and then moving those coins below the radar of traditional financial detection systems. So does the anonymous nature of the currency make it more vulnerable to being used for illegal transactions? I put that to Patrick Merck, Bitcoin's chief legal counsel.
Well, of course we're concerned about it. Right now it would be a terrible method of laundering money. It's a public open transaction record. So there are a few myths about Bitcoin that have circulated that have led to some rash judgments. One is that it's an anonymous payment network. It's actually a totally open payment network. Every transaction is captured in a log called the blockchain. The blockchain is distributed to everybody, every node on the network. That's a 5 gigabyte file about right now that anybody in the world can download and see every transaction in the history of Bitcoin from the very beginning to 10 minutes ago.
So if, for example, I wanted to go and look at your Bitcoin history, which I don't, by the way, but just as an example, that's possible.
It is possible. Now, what Bitcoin does have is privacy, and it puts privacy back in the hands, financial privacy back in the hands of consumers, because what you see on the log is a Bitcoin address, sort of like an IP address that represents my account. Now, correlating data to understand that that is me and not somebody else is something that is possible. Keeping that address private is also possible, but it's up to the consumer to do it. And it takes a lot of hard work right now on the consumer side to make sure you have that privacy.
But Bitcoin has certainly caught the attention of law enforcement and intelligence agencies around the world. Michael Parsons is a banker and has researched cryptocurrencies extensively. He was also one of a handful of advisors invited to take part in a recent gathering at the Treasury in the UK, bringing together technical experts, government officials, law enforcement officials, and representatives from the UK's intelligence agencies, including MI5 and GCHQ. While the details of the meeting remain secret, I asked him to give me a general sense of what concerns governments have about digital currencies.
I think the British government has indicated to me that they don't have the same concerns as their American cousins. At the moment, there is no official need to regulate Bitcoin, and there is no regulation which applies to Bitcoin, and it is legal to use Bitcoin. Unfortunately, the weakest point of Bitcoin is in the exchanges, and unless you have a regulating exchange, then no bank will deal with you, and you'll be unable to transfer money to and from fiat currencies to Bitcoin.
What do you hear about money laundering? Because that seems to be something that comes up again and again and again.
I think any form of cash notes, dollars or £50 notes, can be used and is used for illicit purposes. And the only way to stop that is to not issue paper currencies, if you like.
But is it easier through something like Bitcoin? Essentially, by its very definition, is set up as a sort of decentralized system. Is it easier?
It might be easier, but in a way it's not. Cash is the easiest way because cash is not regulated at all. You just buy cash and transfer cash, and it's not regulated. And in the same way that digital cash is not regulated either. But unfortunately, any form of cash can be used for illicit purposes. I think they're concerned about the illicit use of money for drugs and possibly terrorism. This is the big. One of the issues with Bitcoin is that because it's anonymous, you can't trace the transactions in the same way you can't trace cash. However, what I would say is cash is totally anonymous, but Bitcoin is pseudo-anonymous because every transaction is in the public ledger of all the transactions, which is called the blockchain. So if you get a forensic accountant, computer specialist, you could analyze the transactions, and there was a way of partially pinpointing down who's doing it. What I would say now is that it's quite clear from speaking to my colleagues around the world that the criminal organizations are less likely to use Bitcoin from the very fact that it's under the spotlight by all the security services.
Are governments able to follow the money?
It would be possible to follow the money because you can see where the money's gone, but you don't know the identity of that account. But you would be able to see in which part of the world it's being paid to and from.
But the potential is there for transactions to take place that are essentially very difficult for the authorities to track?
Well, that is true, but I proposed to the UK government that one way round that, and I'm making this a proposal to other parties too, is that when and if they authorise a Bitcoin exchange, any Bitcoin exchange would have to comply with the following number one rule. That is that each individual customer would only be allowed to have one Bitcoin address, so you can see the money going in and out. And all parties have to have transfers between Bitcoin and fiat currencies. So by doing that, you would tend to eliminate, if not control, or see who is doing what.
The emergence of these currencies has also led to a series of regulatory headaches. In the United States, the CFTC, which oversees financial regulation, is considering new rules to regulate Bitcoin. The US Treasury has also brought in tough new money laundering rules in an effort to force Bitcoin to comply with stricter reporting requirements. The European Central Bank published a report last year analysing the future impact of Bitcoin. It concludes that virtual currencies will grow and pose challenges to regulators over how to respond. Some Bitcoin enthusiasts and entrepreneurs fear central banks will simply ban their trade. Others argue central banks are worried about losing their monopoly on national money supplies and fear a loss of control. Tour de Meester is an analyst and has written extensively about virtual currencies. He says their popularity isn't just about technology, but also marks a shift in attitudes towards state control.
The ECB issued a report in October 2012 in which certain issues were put on paper. And the first thing that they noted is that virtual currencies, such as Bitcoin, and I quote, could have a substitution effect on central bank money if they become widely accepted. It would endanger future revenues for central banks, and that's a concern. And then also they're concerned about the actual control of the money supply. They've always been used to traditional currencies, whereby they can just pick up the phone and call the other country or call with some kind of international institution like the IMF if there is a need for currency or regulation. But with Bitcoin, there is no central agency to call. And of course, that's the great appeal for the users because it's kind of irrepressible from the government's or central bank's perspective. It is a concern because all of a sudden they have to compete in the free market against new and decentralized initiatives. Not a lot of uses that are causes for great concern. I mean, people use it to donate to WikiLeaks, so that their donation cannot be traced back to them, out of concern for this over-regulation that we are seeing, or over prosecution at times. Of course, there are people buying some illicit substances with it. That's something we're definitely seeing. But we see with traditional currencies and even traditional banks, money is being laundered on a massive scale. I mean, recently, for example, HSBC was fined $2 billion because they were laundering money for drug cartels, and that had been going on for a decade.
Patrick Merck from Bitcoin says to fully understand why these currencies have taken off, you have to also understand the philosophy behind them in an age of disclosures about alleged government surveillance, as well as failings in the traditional financial system.
It's a matter of privacy and individual choice, right? So as an individual using the system, you can choose to be as private as you like. And I think that's part of what's revolutionary about Bitcoin in the first place. So just as software like Tor can protect your identity as you surf the internet, only if you're very careful, the same applies for Bitcoin. For some people, that means privacy from the government. For some people, that just means privacy from their employers. If they need to seek out health care that they don't want their employers to know about, this is something that they can control. You know, what can be seen, what can't be seen, whereas if your employer runs a credit report, perhaps they can find that information out. And the level of privacy that you need will dictate how many of those protections that you take. And you see it in the open source software movement, you see it with Bitcoin, you see it with the sharing economy, you see it across a number of different dimensions right now. And there's a famous historian who said that when you look at a revolution from afar, it looks like a tidal wave. When you're in the middle, it looks like a whirlpool. And right now it feels like a whirlpool, but I think when we look back on it, it will look like a tidal wave.
In the UK, regulators have appeared confused over how to regulate digital currencies. I asked Britain's Financial Conduct Authority for an interview to discuss regulation. They referred me to the Bank of England, saying it was a matter for them. The bank referred me back to the FCA before conceding in an email.
These currencies are not regulated in the UK, so it's neither the responsibility of the FCA or the Bank of England. Her Majesty's Treasury is responsible for setting what is and isn't regulated in the UK, so I would suggest you speak to them for further clarification.
However, the Treasury did not respond to a request for an interview. But whatever the merits or demerits of digital currencies, what does their emergence tell us about how we value money, or how we think about wealth in the 21st century? Felix Martin is the author of Money, the Unauthorized Biography.
To me, they seem to be a very modern manifestation of a very ancient phenomenon. And that phenomenon is the appearance of private monies. It's very easy to think, in the modern monetary economies that we live in, that all money has always been money issued by the state. We live in economies where obviously the vast majority of money is national currency. Pounds issued by the Bank of England, or rubles issued by the Central Bank of Russia. The truth is that throughout history there have been hundreds of examples, thousands of examples of private monies, that is to say, credit which is issued by some private issuer, not the sovereign, not the state, which then circulates as money. And in fact, there are lots of examples of it today, ranging from little sort of community currencies. Here in the UK, we have various examples of these. Brixton, which is a neighbourhood of London, for example, issues its own pound, the Brixton pound. Lewis, at a little town down in Sussex, does the same. There are lots of examples in America. There are also quite large-scale examples. There's a very well-known example of such a so-called mutual credit network in Switzerland, the WIR network, which is on a very large scale and involves not individuals but companies. Bitcoin and so on, these sorts of things, they seem to me to be examples of private currencies. And the payment system that they use is a bit different from traditional private monies. They don't use banknotes or coins, these kinds of things, to represent themselves. And they don't even use the official banking system and its electronic representations of currency and its electronic payment system. They have their own, which is based on the internet. But apart from that, very modern aspect to what they're doing. They seem to me an example of a very ancient phenomenon.
In terms of countries and how countries value their wealth, how they value their economy, I mean, it used to be in terms of things like the gold reserves, and of course Britain famously sold its gold reserves at a very low price, or at least a substantial chunk of them. But are we, in the 21st century, at a national level, are countries having to rethink the way that they measure their own national wealth?
And that's a very profound question, in fact, and one which is really at the basis of, or was at the basis of the beginning of modern economics, because the one of the great revolutions that Adam Smith, justifiably called the founder of modern economics, made when he wrote his masterwork, The Wealth of Nations, the point, as it were, that he was trying to get across was that the wealth of a nation is not to be measured in stuff that it has, and it didn't matter in particular if that was sort of gold and silver and precious metals, which at that time was something which people were quite fixated on. There was a whole school of economists who believed that you could basically say which country was most rich by looking at how much gold and silver it has. But he said just it's not stuff in general at all. What it is the productive capacity of the country. It's how much value, economic value, that country can generate, how much its industry and its services and the skills of its people and so on can generate. It's a forward-looking concept of how wealthy a country is. It's a very important and brilliant insight that he made. I think it's undoubtedly true. How exactly you then measure the productive capacity of a country is a much trickier issue.
It's perhaps no surprise that in an age of financial turmoil, more and more people are interested in using digital currencies. Those involved in the industry admit the technology is in its infancy and it's unclear how it might develop in the future. But it is clear that Bitcoin has captured people's interest and exposed how governments around the world are struggling to come to terms with technological developments. But with countries like Thailand already moving to outlaw it, Bitcoin's future is uncertain. The next few months will clearly be key. China has hinted it may also introduce a ban. But can it really be put back into a digital Pandora's box? Bitcoin could become just another currency consigned to the virtual recycling bin, or it could represent a sea change in how money works and is a sign of things to come. You've been listening to me, Scott Craig. For more on this and other news, features and analysis, head to our website at ruvr.co.uk. You can also send us your comments on this or any of our other stories via our Twitter handle at Voice of Russia UK. Thanks for listening. Stay with us here at The Voice of Russia in London.
This is the Voice of Russia, broadcasting from the heart of London. From Monday to Friday, we're live here on digital from 4 p.m. until 8. We're also online at ruvr.co.uk. Tune in for current affairs, news, arts and debate.
Online or in shops. This story starts back in 2009 when a previously unknown programmer calling himself Satoshi Nakamoto published a paper online introducing a new peer-to-peer payment system called Bitcoin. He outlined a complex algorithm that would control how the currency worked. It built on a number of technological innovations, lessons learned from previous failures, and incorporated heavy encryption and a totally decentralized payment system to move bitcoins around the world. But crucially, he structured the new currency to have a maximum supply. Only a maximum of 21 million bitcoins will ever exist, meaning the currency, in theory, should avoid inflation and retain its value, mimicking the way a conventional money supply at its most basic should work. But as quickly as Nakamoto appeared, he vanished into the shadows, and to this day, no one knows who he really is or what became of him. But that didn't stop his new anonymous currency from taking off. Anton Yemelyanov is a Russian entrepreneur and the founder of Litecoin, an online currency platform based on bitcoins. I asked him about them exactly catching us at our best. An online dating, something that many people thought had a faint whiff of desperation about it when it took off, has now become just another way for people to meet. But would you trust your money in a totally digital currency? Freely exchanged like dollars, rubles, or yen. A new phenomenon has emerged, cryptocurrencies, and chief among them, Bitcoin. But what exactly is a cryptocurrency? What does it do? What is it used for? How safe is it? And is it, as some observers and regulators believe, being used to launder cash and pay for illicit transactions away from the ever-watchful eye of the authorities? Thailand thinks so. Its central bank has just banned Bitcoin, making it illegal to use the currency in the country. So what's all the fuss about, and what does it tell us about changing attitudes to money? Are we moving away from traditional currencies, failing banks, state surveillance, in favor of anonymity and online money? So what exactly is a Bitcoin? Put simply, a Bitcoin is a unit of digital currency that can be traded or used to buy goods and services, either You're listening to The Voice of Russia in London. I'm Scott Craig. In this program, I'm taking an in-depth look at something that's had a lot of press attention, but is still relatively little understood. We're used to using the internet in many different aspects of our daily lives, from the weekly food shopping to booking travel, banking, and of course sharing the details of our every waking moment on social media. It seems like every night out in a bar or restaurant with friends is documented, the pictures uploaded and shared with the world, often not